Hello, Adam Eason here, back for another episode of Piecemeal, where I take a nuts and bolts look at a musical phrase to see what makes it tick. Today, we're going to take a look at the opening phrase of Fanny Mendelssohn's Opus 2, a collection of piano pieces she called Vier Lieder for Pianoforte. In German, Lied is the word for song, but in the early 19th century, the term was used to denote a specific genre of art song, in which the singer was accompanied by a keyboard. So in this collection, and in a similar collection written by her brother, Felix Mendelssohn, Fanny is writing a work for solo piano in reference to that genre. If you haven't heard this work before, I recommend you listen to it before the analysis. I always consider it important to connect how we analyze a piece to how we hear it, so I've linked a performance in the description below. With that in mind, let's take a look at the first 13 measures to see how it's put together. We'll start with the melody. To begin with, we should take a look at two important features, the time signature and the key signature. In this case, the time signature, 3/4, denotes possibly some kind of waltz or dance-like form, and the key signature, a single F sharp, might tell us maybe we're in E minor or G major, depending on how she starts. The first two notes of the melody, however, bring a little bit of ambiguity to what the key signature is trying to tell us. She does give us an E, which might hint E minor, but the descent to the A on a strong beat doesn't give us a clear indication one way or another of what might be happening with the key. As is somewhat typical of European vocal music, melodic leaps are followed by stepwise motion in the opposite direction. And that's what we see here. By the end of the second measure, Fanny Mendelssohn takes us from that E leaping down to the A, stepping up, overshooting the C by just a little bit, and then coming back down to finish on C. Also of importance, these first two measures give us the main rhythmic motive that she's going to use for the melody throughout the opening section. For the next two measures, you can see she uses that same rhythmic motive, a pickup quarter note, dotted quarter note, 3/8, and then 2 quarter notes, to continue the melody. But this time, she starts with an ascending melodic leap, and then circles around and decorates a D sharp. At this point in the melody, it would seem we're pretty clearly in E minor, that D sharp probably inferring a B major or B7 chord, which would be the dominant in E minor. For now, we'll have to wait and see how Mendelssohn develops this harmonic scheme and where she takes us from here. As the melody continues, Mendelssohn takes the original rhythmic motive and compresses it by cutting off the 2 quarter notes at the end. The new rhythmic motive is repeated, but because the upbeat quarter note has been so strongly fixed due to its repetition, we hear a bit of what is called elision, where an apparent cadence is used to instead keep the momentum moving forward. That rhythmic elision is highlighted in the darker green on measure 5. Mendelssohn then further compresses the rhythmic figure by removing the dotted quarter and replacing it with a diminution of the 2 previous quarter notes, now taking the space of only 2 eighth notes. This has the effect of increasing the forward momentum of the music, also increasing the drama of the melody. Taking a step back and looking at the pitch contours of the melody, the pickup to measure 5 sees a descending leap of a tritone, which is a rather dissonant interval, followed by another descent of a tritone into measure 6. These 2 leaps are then counterbalanced by a line ascending mostly by step, but the ascent is colored by a number of chromatic alterations. Take note how the increase in rhythmic drive is matched by an increase in chromatic intensity. At measure 9, Mendelssohn reaches the highest point of the melody and the highest point in musical intensity with a high A. She then begins to release the tension with a simple downward scale. It will take some time to unwind all of that tension completely, though, and she brings back the pickup quarter note into dotted quarter note at the end of measure 10 and to measure 11. The D sharp leading to E again seems to infer an E minor key, but as Mendelssohn brings back the second rhythmic figuration, the descending pitch line takes us to rest finally on a G. It will ultimately be up to the bass line to help us determine if the phrase is in G major or E minor, but even without it, the G major implication is quite strong. Looking at the bass line now, there are a few notable moments to unpack. In the first measure, I've included more than just the bass to highlight an interesting voicing choice. The bass sits on a D, while the tenor takes a C. These two notes, along with the A and the melody, give us enough to recognize a dominant seventh, placing the underlying scale in G major. The tenor voice, however, moves in contrary motion against the melody and seems to take the rest of the bass line from there. It's a particularly interesting detail when considering the end of the phrase, at which point the tenor line melds back with the harmony voices and the true bass line returns to give us a strong 5-1 cadence, confirming the G major tonality. Because this is a piano, we don't hear any timbral distinction between the two voices, but it is kind of neat regardless. It's a detail an orchestrator might want to think strongly about when considering which instruments play what. In the second measure, Mendelssohn chooses a circle of fifths progression in the bass, specifically a 2-5-1 progression. Because of how it fits the meter, however, the resolution to 1, ostensibly the tonic, lands on a weak beat of the bar. This momentum carries the music forward, causing the bass to overshoot tonic and land on 4 instead. Moving ahead to measure 4, we should take note of how the melody interacts with the bass. Here, Mendelssohn gives the strong beat of the bar what would traditionally be considered a dissonance, a perfect fourth. This then resolves by step, forming a third with the bass. This figuration repeats throughout the phrase, the dissonant notes colored orange and the consonances in blue. Also take note how the frequency of this figuration suddenly increases at measure 9, coinciding with the climax of the phrase. Finally, take note of how closely the bass tracks with the melody. For the most part, it is harmonizing in thirds, and most of the contrary motion happens at the level of a beat rather than a bar. In particular, look at how the bass line ascends in mostly chromatic steps at measures 7 through 9. We'll consider this figuration more closely when considering the harmonic analysis. We'll take the harmony bit by bit since it's a little involved. The harmony is filled in with two voices. While these two voices are joined rhythmically, they do not always change at the same time. Because of this, it will often be more profitable to analyze how these changes operate contrapuntally rather than harmonically. A good example is at the end of measure 1. For most of the bar, the harmony is a D7 chord except for a single eighth note at the end. As previously stated, the soprano and tenor voices of the harmony move in contrary motion against each other. The alto voice stays put on a D, while the soprano 2 line moves in parallel with the melody. When all of these movements are taken together, we can clearly hear a G major chord, the tonic of the piece. It's not likely, however, that Mendelssohn was consciously thinking, oh, I'll have a D7 except for this 1/8 note right here, which I'll make a G. More likely, it is the result of how Mendelssohn chose to harmonize through voice leading rather than through block chords. A similar moment happens in measure 2. Again, the tenor, or bass, moves against the melody in contrary motion. The alto stays put and the soprano 2 line follows the melody. This produces in the third beat a G major 7th chord. Again, I don't think this was a conscious choice of chord so much as an interesting dissonance that results from contrapuntal writing. The dissonance then resolves in measure 3 to a C major chord. I want to take a moment to talk about the tonal ambiguity at play here. When we looked at the melody, it was unclear for a long time if we were in G major or E minor. Now, with the harmony, we can see we are in G major, but the way Mendelssohn places the tonic chord on metrically weak beats, or includes dissonances like a major 7th at the end of measure 2, consistently deflects our ears away from G major. She creates a strong expectation of resolution to G, but even when she gives us tonic, they're not supported in ways which create a clear sense of arrival. This pattern of subverting points of resolution continues in measures 4, 5, and 6. In these measures, Mendelssohn resolves the dissonant chords, dominant sevenths and diminished sevenths, but they resolve on weak beats. Not just any weak beat either, but the third beat of each measure. These resolutions coincide with metric pickup beats, creating elisions which push the momentum through the resolved chords and into new dissonances which, within the paradigm of tonal harmony and classical counterpoint, must be resolved again. This has the effect of frustrated satisfaction, requiring the listener to wait for a final arrival. As we move forward into the most complex moment of the phrase, I want to remind the listener of the underlying ascending scale which underpins measures 7 through 9, and how that ascent tracks in thirds with the melody. If we were to look only at the chords in these bars, we might wonder how the heck she came up with this gnarly progression. It's not at all obvious where these chords came from or how they fit together in any traditional subdominant-dominant tonic construction. If instead we consider that she is operating contrapuntally, deriving the harmonic filler through voice leading and dissonance-consonance resolutions rather than block chords, it becomes more clear how this section was constructed. Looking at the inner voices, we can see that the tenor and alto lines move in scalar motion, but are out of sync with each other. They alternate dissonances and consonances every beat. Most noteworthy is the last beat of measure 8, where the two voices move simultaneously to a dissonant interval of a major second, and that does resolve to a major chord, but resolves at the same time the melody moves to an extremely dissonant interval called a cross relation, playing an E sharp, or F natural, against a D major chord. Again, Mendelssohn sets up the expectation of resolution, but defies that expectation at the last second. At last, in the final 4 bars of the phrase, Mendelssohn unequivocally gives us a 4-5-1 progression with a few little twists. The D sharp in measure 10, which had previously played a role as a leading tone towards E minor, is here subdued as a chromatic non-chord tone moved towards by leap of a tritone, which can't be an accident considering the prominent tritone leaps earlier in the phrase. The melody continues to form some nice dissonances against the harmony as well, the E against a G6-4 chord in measure 11, and a nice crunchy B against a D7 in measure 12. Finally, after 13 measures, Mendelssohn wraps up the phrase with a true resolution to G major, except the piece isn't done. The 8th note rhythm in the middle voices continues, thus drawing the momentum forward into the next phrase of the work. There are 2 points I want to end with. First, how Mendelssohn creates harmony through counterpoint. Dissonances are peppered throughout the phrase, but these dissonances don't just pop out of nowhere. They are the result of careful voice leading and a clear understanding of traditional counterpoint. It's worth noting that both Fanny and her brother Felix were great admirers of J.S. Bach, and I think you can see some of his influence at work, particularly with how she handles the inner voices of the texture. Second, it's really worth understanding how she uses rhythm and meter to subvert harmonic expectations. A lot of analysis doesn't give rhythm much time. It focuses more on harmony analysis, asking how pitches and chords relate to each other within a larger harmonic framework. But as I hopefully made clear, Mendelssohn's use of meter and rhythm are critical components for how she is able to sustain such a long phrase without a sense of clear resolution. It's worth considering how meter and harmony intersects in works of your own composition as well. That's it for today then. If you found this useful, I invite you to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Also, if there are any phrases you find especially intriguing, don't be afraid to suggest it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.